Hey all, so we're back with another Spotlight with Context here, and today we are talking about Northstar. I am really excited about this champion. We'll get into it a little bit as we go, but I'm just going to say this is one of my favorite characters to play that we've shipped thus far this year. If you are only interested in how quickly a champion finishes battlegrounds fights, you may not care that much about them. I'm going to get that out of the way up front so that you don't listen to this whole however long this video turns out to be, and then whine about it in the comments. But there's plenty to talk about here. Is very complex isn't the right word necessarily, but there's a lot of intricacies to this kit, so let's start talking about it. First off, base stats. The prestige is solid. It's a modern champion, but not all that high, right? We're going to take a look at the attributes. We can start out with a survivability of 3. There's not a lot in the base kit that really does all that much to keep Northstar alive, but there's also not really much in the way of big vulnerabilities, and then the SIG actually adds quite a bit as far as keeping him alive against the ways in which skill champions normally close out fights. Damage of 4.5. This may surprise you, given the caveat I already gave about Battlegrounds, but that is because Northstar is a ramp champion. He ramps over the course of a fight to truly incredible levels. But it wouldn't be fair to call him a 5 out of 5 because it takes time for him to get there, right? We generally reserve our 5s in damage for characters that get there very quickly, and Northstar does need a bit of a runway. Now, I don't want to give the impression that he is terrible in short or medium fights, just that it takes a while for him to really pop off. Ease of use 2.5, similar to the damage, the longer the fight goes on, the easier Northstar becomes to play. Momentum is a core part of his kit, somewhat related thematically to the way Quicksilver builds momentum, but not really the same resource in any way, because Northstar does not lose momentum at any point. He just keeps going faster and faster, right? That said, there are some significant challenges to getting the most out of him in those short fights before the momentum builds up, and so 2.5 is pretty accurate. Utility of 2.5 I think is also fair. There is not a ton of shutdown potential in this kit, and there's only a few targeted pieces of utility, but those pieces are very powerful and aimed squarely at the skill class, so you don't want to ignore them either. And then Defender Strength of 2, a lot of this is just because of his animations, honestly. Like Quicksilver, he does have multi-hit mediums and lights. So, moving on to strengths and weaknesses, already talked about this a bit, but longer duration fights. Northstar shines the longer he is in the fight. It gets really, really nuts. I did the math on exactly what the ceiling is relative to where he starts, and we will talk about that later as we go. Northstar has access to a lot of prowess. It's not more than any other mutant. Bishop definitely gains more quickly. I think Storm can sit at a higher stack theoretically, but Northstar has a lot of prowess. He's one of the best prowess gainers in the class for anything that matters for. And then Reverb is a new mechanic. For those of you asking, isn't Reverb on Killmonger? Technically, that's reverberation. But you're being pedantic, DLL. Yes, I am, but this is different. The way to remember Reverb is that this is effectively trauma, the ability that Luke, Red Guardian, and Quicksilver have, but instead of living in a debuff on the opponent that then deals them extra damage when they're struck, Reverb lives on Northstar, and then his hits deal extra damage. That damage is physical burst damage, so again, very similar to trauma, but the effect lives on him rather than on his opponent. This, like the prowess, builds over the course of the fight and can lead to some very nutty damage outputs. And then slow. In shorter fights, Northstar's slow is fine and mostly special because it is passive and can't be purified, right? In longer fights, or against skill champions that like to evade, this slow's uptime gets significantly better, and I think might be the longest slow in the game other than Quicksilver's indefinite one. So once you get going, very good control over Evade and Unstoppable. Now, weaknesses. His abilities are triggered by special attacks, which means you do need to throw special attacks. So if something is getting in the way of your ability to throw special attacks, this mutant will be pretty sad. Likewise, a fair number of Northstar's abilities either trigger on or are amplified by critical hits. He doesn't need them for his kit to function, but it significantly speeds him up. And so if something is preventing you from landing critical hits, you will slow down. Getting into the abilities themselves, the first thing to wrap your head around is Speed Burst. So Speed Burst starts out on cooldown. You won't have access to it for 24 seconds if you do nothing. It will show up faster given that you play the fight, and we'll get to that. But when the cooldown expires and Speed Burst is available, then activating a special attack during or after a dash or a dash attack, or right after punishing a heavy or special, activates Speed Burst for 12 seconds. Ooh, just saw that typo. Speed Burst, not Speed Bust. But then it goes back on cooldown. So that's kind of a complex clause there. Let's break it down. So a dash attack means that you have to be far enough away to actually enter the dash animation. This is the same rules for Kitty activating her phase. You have a bit of a window after the attack actually lands, so you can do your full first medium and then throw the special attack. That's fine. But you do need that distance. However, this second half of it is basically to let you know that after a heavy or a special attack, where it might be a little bit harder to build that distance and then dash in, and be sure that you do actually trigger a dash, Northstar just automatically is able to activate Speed Burst there as long as you're punishing something. So if you're not really able to dash forwards and backwards in a fight with Northstar, but you have Speed Burst available, bait a heavy. And then just punish that heavy attack and immediately throw a special, and you'll be good to go. Now, while Speed Burst is active, Northstar's special attacks cost 25% less power. So if you are almost at 3 bars of power and activate a special 2 in Speed Burst, you will still have 25% of your max power left, and will be able to pretty quickly get to and throw a special 1 right after it. Now, Speed Burst is paused while Northstar is using a dash, medium attack, striker, or during either champion's special attacks. So reminder that the base duration is 12 seconds, but if you are dashing in and out, using your strikers, and either using your own specials or baiting out the opponent's specials because you hit them enough to push them over a bar, you can stretch that 12 seconds out much further. And then as a defender, Speed Burst activates immediately when the cooldown expires, because otherwise it would probably never happen at all, right? So just when that happens for a defending Northstar, keep in mind that he may have power left over after a special. So discussing Northstar's basic attacks, his light attack hits have a 30% down to 10% chance to grant a reverb charge, scaling down with how many charges he already has. So what this means, just to unpack it a little bit, is that when Northstar has no reverbs at all, any hit from his light attacks, because remember his light attacks have multiple hits in them, has a 30% chance to grant a reverb charge, but once he starts gaining reverb charges, that chance drops. It will never go lower than 10%, meaning that you're still probably going to be gaining reverb charges in your basic combos just because of how many light attack hits Northstar has throughout the fight, no matter how many you've banked. But it is easier and more reliable to get the first several than it is to get your 30th or 40th, right? Now, medium attack hits cause the cooldown for Speed Burst to briefly expire faster. So if that sounds weird to you, this is very similar to how Chie'lt plays, where there are various things that cause her Spirit Charge timer to expire faster. You'll just notice it burst down in duration. That's what happens here, right? If you have enough reverb charges or you're not particularly concerned about them and you just want access to Speed Burst as quickly as possible, just throw medium, because that 24-second cooldown will expire more quickly. and won't take nearly 24 seconds. Now, specifically against skill champions, the first hit of the second medium attack, because remember, all of the basic attacks have multiple hits, but the first hit of the medium 2 inflicts or refreshes, if it's already there, a non-stacking armor break debuff, lowering armor rating by a small amount for 12 seconds. So that refresh is important because it means that if your opponent cares about debuffs being inflicted on them, then Northstar won't be inflicting a new armor break, he'll just refresh the one that's already there. And this means that you can basically have 100% uptime on this armor break once it sticks, and it will only ever count as one debuff, which is sometimes very important. If you're wondering why this is here, well then think about some of the most annoying skill defenders, and it will become clear, especially in conjunction with this next bullet, because while that armor break is active, the opponent's critical resistance is lowered by 80%. This doesn't completely get rid of critical resistance, but it does really chip away at it, and allow Northstar to land those crits against skill champions that he wants so badly, for reasons we'll get to later on. If this armor break is purified, then Northstar gains a reverb charge, so you're still scaling up your damage. On to another core mechanic, we have momentum, which stacks up to 10. Keep that number in mind as we go. So activating a special attack grants 1 indefinite momentum per level of the special attack. So special 2 grants 2 momentum, special 3 grants 3. And then when a skill opponent evades, gain 1 momentum. And again, these are indefinite, so they never go away. Once you have momentum, you have it for the rest of the fight. This also means that if a skill opponent evades, you're basically getting the payout of throwing a special 1, so that can dramatically reduce your ramp-up time. There's no cooldown on this, it's just every time a skill opponent evades, you get credit for basically throwing a special attack. Now, there are a lot of reasons you care about momentum, but we'll start with this first one. The cooldown for Speed Burst is reduced by 2 seconds per momentum. Remember that base cooldown is 24 seconds. Momentum has a max stacks of 10, so this means that that 24 can come all the way down to just 4 seconds. So remember, you have 12 seconds of Speed Burst that you can stretch out much longer. And then at max momentum, it will go on cooldown for only 4 seconds, and even that 4 seconds can be sped up by you just throwing medium attacks. So once a fight has been going for a while, Northstar is almost permanently in Speed Burst without you really having to do a whole lot of juggling. And that's why so many things just feel so good in long fights. Now, as an attacker specifically, Northstar gains extra benefits for having various momentum thresholds. While he has at least 2, he becomes unstoppable while dashing. So this is really helpful for going for those dash attacks to either pause Speed Burst if you're already in it, or to land the dash attack and activate Speed Burst in the first place without worrying about getting intercepted. While you're at 6 or more momentum, then the first hit of your special attack will become unblockable if it hits into the opponent's block. And this is the first or second hits, which is pretty important because Northstar has a lot of hits in his special attacks. And this basically means that you can just dash into the opponent, because reminder, you're going to be unstoppable, throw your special attack, not worry if they block, evade, or anything else, and it will just bowl them over anyway. So this, again, kind of eliminates the skill ask of managing Speed Burst once the fight has gone on long enough that Northstar has sufficient momentum. And then at 10 momentum, you're maxed. The final hit of special attacks inflicts a stun passive, and while this stun is active, the opponent is locked in place. So this is really important because it allows you to throw a special attack while in Speed Burst that costs less power. It will stun the opponent and lock them in place, meaning they do not get knocked back by the special attack. They are right there in front of you. And then without you having to dash forward or worry about them standing up or anything like that, you can wail on them to give yourself enough power to then immediately throw another special attack. And that basically just makes everything work that much better, right? So again, momentum is something that Northstar has to build up over time, but part of the reason he has to build it up over time is because as it gets going, it just makes everything about this kit so much easier and more powerful. Moving on to special attacks. On activation, any special attack will give you a 9% prowess buff per momentum for 10 seconds. So at max stacks of momentum, this will give you 10 prowess buffs, right? Even on the special one, this one doesn't scale with bars of power spent. All special attacks also have an additional 4% chance per momentum, so up to a 40% chance, to grant an additional prowess. And then all special attack hits gain a pretty chunky amount of crit rating during speed burst. So you're going to get prowess and deal more damage in general, and if you're in speed burst, those hits are more likely to be critical, which is then also magnified by the prowess, further increasing your damage. For the special one, on activation, you inflict a slow passive for 10 seconds, which is not that long, right? You would have to really stay on top of this to keep the slow up if it was just 10 seconds. But duration is increased by 2 seconds per momentum, and the first time you throw this, you're going to get 1 momentum by activating the special, which means that this starts at 12 and just goes up. At the max duration of 30 seconds, this is very easy to keep up, and if you can basically just spam special ones, is a permanent shutdown. Now, kind of similar to Danny with the slow on her special one, there is some tension here with also getting the damage payout that you'll see on the special 2 while keeping this slow up. But that tension is lessened the longer the fight goes because the slow up time gets better and because Northstar in Speed Burst reduces the cost of his special attacks, meaning that you can throw the special 1 and hold on to some of your power to get to the special 2 more quickly, or vice versa. I'll also remind you that if you really need the slow for evade against a skill character, then you're going to ramp the duration of the slow more quickly because them evading is going to give you extra momentum. And then additionally, each hit in the special 1 has a 15% chance to pause personal prowess and reverb effects for 2 seconds. These pauses can stack and expire one at a time, so very similar to how Iron Man works with pausing his armor ups. Each pause is only 2 seconds, but if you have 20 pauses, then you effectively have banked 40 seconds of pause because each of those 20 pauses is 2 seconds, and they don't start expiring until the one on top is gone. Independently, if the hit was critical, then there's an 100% chance to grant an additional pause. That independently part means that even if you don't succeed on the 15% chance roll to get the pause on each hit, as long as that hit crits, you're guaranteed a pause. So this means that if you throw the special 1 in Speed Burst when you also have significantly higher crit rating, you're not really rolling the dice you are outside of Speed Burst because you're likely going to land several crits given how many hits are in this special, and therefore you're almost guaranteed to get a bunch of pauses. And then if you succeed those 15% chance rolls, then you just get even more. That's kind of how I think about this. The third bullet is the most important one for you because you're chasing Speed Burst. The second one is just a bonus. You'll get more out of it sometimes than others. Moving on to the special 2. Each hit, and like the special 1, this special has a lot of hits in it, converts 1 reverb charge into a reverb passive for 14 seconds. Now that 8% part means that each of your hits are going to do 8% of damage dealt as a burst of physical damage for each reverb passive on you. These stack up to 35, which means that at maximum, this is the math I was talking about earlier, you can have up to 280% potency reverb active, meaning that you're dealing the damage of your actual hit, and then that, again, almost tripled. Additionally, the prowess that we already talked about stack up to 360%, which means that you are getting the base damage of your special attacks plus an additional 360%. So 460% total special damage multiplied by 3.8 through the reverb. Meaning that if you compare a special hit at the very beginning of the fight when you have none of these effects with one when Northstar is at his maximum ramp deals 17.5 times as much damage. So that's the kind of damage reach we're talking about here, and most of it is red numbers. Once this guy gets rolling, he really cooks. Now, these reverb passives only last for 14 seconds, which isn't that long, but remember the special one can give you pauses, and these will start paused if you already have pauses active from the special one. Again, we have this clause, if the hit was critical, then you gain 2 reverb passives instead of 1. And then on top of that, if Speed Burst is active, then whether you get 1 or 2 reverb charges off of each of your hits, you have an additional 20% chance to get a third. Or a second, if you only got 1, right? So you can get a lot of reverbs here, even out of only a few reverb charges. If you're particularly lucky, you could turn 10 reverb charges into as many as 30 reverb passives. You're seeing here how important Speed Burst is because it gives you more crits and more pauses in the Special 1 for better uptime, and it gives you a better conversion rate in the Special 2 for more reverbs, so that you have to throw fewer Special 2s so that you can throw more Special 1s and stack those pauses. Moving on to the Special 3, this is kind of your standard ramp special. You get 8 reverb charges. Remember, these are the charges, not the passives. So this still has to be converted by the special 2, but it's just a guaranteed, here's your 8 charges, regardless of how many light attacks you succeeded your rolls on. And, more importantly, for the rest of the fight, Northstar's chance to trigger prowess, reverb charges, and pauses is increased by 110%. And this stacks up to twice. Meaning if you've thrown 2 special 3s, then all of the chances that you see listed in this kit are multiplied by 3.2, basically. So if we go back to the special 2 there, you have that 20% chance to grant an additional reverb. After 2 special 3s, that's going to be about a 65% chance. And so on, right? So 3 bars of power is a lot. You're really paying a cost for that, but in long enough fights, it supercharges the rest of Northstar's kit enough that I do think it's worth it. Now, moving on to the signature ability, Aerodynamic. Whenever Northstar would gain momentum, he gains a very chunky physical resistance passive for 6 seconds on base, and then duration is increased by an additional 2 seconds per momentum. This also applies to when Northstar gains momentum when a skill opponent evades, just to clarify that. This only ever stacks up to 1, so you're only getting 5,300 physical resistance. Oh no. But note that extra duration. This can be as long as 26 seconds off of a single momentum gain. And it's very important to note that this is when Northstar would gain momentum, so you continue to do this when you're at maximum, meaning that at full ramp, you basically just always have this up, right? Because you would gain momentum every time you throw a special attack. As long as you're throwing 1 special attack every 26 seconds, you always have this giant physical resistance, right? So there's where some of that survivability comes in. This second bullet adds a little bit more while a physical resistance effect is active. Then Northstar also gains a Reinforce passive, which is a relatively new type. You also saw this on the Aegon Winter of Woe fight, but this just prevents incoming hits from being critical. Think of it as kind of like that part of glancing, but without the other stuff, right? It's just, while Northstar has this Reinforce, incoming hits cannot crit. And incoming hits have 60% reduced block penetration. So while you have this physical resistance, you don't have to worry about crits into your block. You don't have to worry about a lot of block pen, whether it's from stat focus or other abilities. Northstar is just generally tankier, both if he would actually get hit and while blocking. So this is really nice once you get ramped up a bit and at higher sig. But you'll also notice there's no damage in this sig, right? All of the damage is in the base kit. If you are such a pro gamer that you just never get hit or block with Northstar, then you don't actually need his sig at all. I still find it valuable, but just something to point out that the utility and the damage is there right out of the box. So, moving on to synergies, we have True North with Sasquatch and Guardian. For Northstar, while Speed Burst is ready to be activated but hasn't yet been activated, his combat power rate is increased by 15%, letting you get up to a special attack to activate it more easily. For Sasquatch, when he's immune to a stun or frostbite effect, or when inflicted with a cold snap debuff, because remember he's not immune to cold snap, he's just very resistant to it, pause Wrath of Tanarak for 5 seconds. For those of you who really like playing Sasquatch, if you can chase stun effects to get these pauses, that's pretty incredible. And then for Guardian, this is actually the old wording, so I'm just going to say this a little bit differently. A perfect block, which remember Guardian has a 100% chance to do during specials when he well-timed blocks, pauses all force field charges, right? Now, a reminder that Guardian's force field charges are indefinite up to 5, and then the ones after that expire. This just means that, because it doesn't matter if you pause the indefinite ones, all of those force field charges stop ticking down whenever you perfect block. This just gives you that extra incentive to go for it, right? Because already in Guardian's base kit, perfect blocking through his mechanics gives him a burst of power. Now you get a burst of power, and it pauses your force field charges, allowing you to just turbo through your ramp, throw more special ones if you need to, or get to a special 2 faster without losing those charges. Born this way with Iceman allows Northstar's heavy attacks to remove all stacks of his personal pause, to deal a burst of 5% of attack rating and physical damage per personal reverb and prowess effect. So you are giving up a lot of pauses, right? Kind of similar to how you would use Iceman's heavy attack. This does kind of need to be a kill shot, right? Because the minute you throw this, your reverbs and prowess are going to start expiring, and that's normally not a good thing. But if this does enough of a burst, it can absolutely end the fight. And then for Iceman, intercepts and dash attacks inflict a frostbite passive, so just guaranteed they do that, and cause the cooldown for ice armor to briefly expire faster. So both of them get a little bit of inspiration from the other's kit. Gotta go fast with Quicksilver. For Northstar, successfully dodging an attack grants a reverb charge, again just guaranteed, and causes the cooldown for Speed Burst to briefly expire faster, kind of like when he lands his mediums, but this has a cooldown of 3 seconds. So you can't just spam Dex to ramp Northstar, but you can periodically weave this into your rotation and get that much extra ramp, right? And then for Quicksilver, you pause personal trauma debuffs while dashing forward. This isn't going to be huge because Quicksilver doesn't generally do a lot of dashing gameplay backwards and forwards, but especially if your opponent is being a little bit annoying and not throwing specials to give you Quicksilver's personal pause and you dash in to hit their block, maybe this gives you enough time to get them over a bar and pause that trauma. Northstar has Pride with Angela, Valkyrie, Black Cat, and Iceman, which remember is a new generic synergy, granting arm rating, block proficiency, energy, and physical resistance. Just general resilience, good stuff. And has enemies with Loki and Wolverine to give all champions, not just all of them, but all champions on the team, extra crit rating. Now to just briefly chat about relics, because I know that is something a lot of y'all want to know. Most of the mutant relics could work for Northstar, so I think it's kind of what can you spare from the rest of your cast. All of the hits of his special 1 are physical, and therefore benefit from the Gambit relic. About half of the hits in his special 2 are physical, half are energy. That's going to be a decent one for him, right? Because crits generally fuel the rest of his kit. He has a lot of prowess and does have some energy hits on the special too, which will then get magnified by reverb, so you could use Storm. And then Sinister, of course, can give a precision and a little bit of willpower healing, and precision means more crits, and again, the rest of his kit working well. Wouldn't use Wolverine, obviously, but that's always the most narrow one. So whatever works for you, right? I think in general, Gambit is probably going to be best since it only has a few targets, and Sinister's good on just about anyone, but whatever you got handy. And then that's pretty much Northstar, right? Like I said at the beginning of this, Northstar is not going to be setting any speed records, ironically enough, in Battlegrounds, but I think he's still going to be usable there, especially for somebody like Killmonger, who tends to slow down a lot of other options. And anywhere else in the game where there's more runway, I think he's going to feel really good. I'm just going to kind of give away the game here a little bit, because I imagine by the time people watch this, Karate Mike may have shown something similar in the deep dive. When I was playtesting Northstar, I got a couple Necropolis solos, right? I was just aiming at a few individual ones to make sure that things worked, but he can definitely get more. Like, when I say the damage reach is nuts, I mean it. This guy absolutely pulls his weight in Everest content and gets just incredible payouts. Like I said earlier, you can multiply your damage by about 4.5 times with prowess, and then another almost 4 times with the reverb. And when you combine the two of those together with an elevated crit rating, he's just going to melt a lot of people as long as you have any time at all. Similarly, the uptime on that slow gets very good, and so I can see him having some utility in war, even though a lot of people like to go fast there too. They have a bit more patience. It's a really strong kit, and I also, just like I said, I find it really, really fun. And I don't just mean that in a like, this is neat way. I personally just find it very soothing, funnily enough, to build up the resources and then activate the special attacks exactly when I want them to. That's one of the nice things about the kit, is that Speed Burst is an opt-in, right? It's not like Titania's Haymaker, where it just happens and you have to hope that you're lined up. You control when it happens. And so you can set things up and then knock down all of the dominoes at once. And then when Speed Burst runs out, you can kind of pause, back off, maybe throw a special one to give yourself some more pauses, and start setting up for the next big run. And then those big runs just get shorter and closer, not shorter, but closer together as the fight goes on, and everything just starts to sing. I know a lot of people get hung up by Quicksilver's compound basics, and I'm probably going to see the same thing with Northstar, but just do me a favor and give it a shot. I think you may enjoy this one even if you don't like Quicksilver. There's some really cool stuff here. It's a very different take on momentum for a very different speedster, and I think a nice step forward for the game in kind of giving us that kind of gameplay. So hope y'all enjoy this one. See you soon with the next one. And until then, thank you so much for watching, and take care.